When researchers interview teachers about how they adopt new pedagogical practices and where they get the ideas for new pedagogical practices, who has the most influence on them, the number one response that teachers give is other teachers. If you're a principal, if you're a coach, a consultant, that's actually not the best news for you. Your task is not to tell teachers how to teach better. Your task is to create the conditions where teachers can learn from one another. When we visit schools that are involved in launching new innovations, and we see those places go from pockets of excellence where a handful of teachers are doing really innovative practices to truly systematic change across a school or a district, what we see is a cycle of experiment and experience. In every school district that's launching some kind of new initiative, new instructional improvement effort, there's always a small group of teachers willing to be at the vanguard, willing to conduct experiments. Some of those experiments work, some of those experiments don't work. In every case, there's an opportunity for teachers and the folks who work with teachers to learn from those experiments to develop new experience. Ideally, this happens in a context where teachers and the folks who work with them, library media specialists, academic technologists, coaches, get a chance to talk with one another, to debrief about what's working in these new experiments, whether or not they're meeting the learning goals that we set out for our students or not, and what needs to be adjusted. When those teams of people conducting experiments have an opportunity to share their practice with one another and beyond one another with the larger school community, when across different buildings, across different floors, across departments and grade level teams, teachers have a chance to share with one another, that's what inspires new opportunities for planning. And as more folks in a building, in a district, have a chance to plan for new ideas, that's what leads to more experiments. In the places that see substantial change as parts of instructional improvement initiatives, what we see is teachers that are engaged in this kind of cycle. If you're watching this as a teacher leader, we hope that what you'll imagine your role is in launching innovation in schools is being parts of these cycles of experiment and experience. Now, there are lots of you who might be watching this who don't spend every one of your days inside classrooms, who don't work with students directly, who work more with teachers, principals, superintendents, coaches. Your role in this cycle of experiment and experience is thinking about how you can grease the wheels of this cycle. How can you provide the resources, the tools, the protocols, the time to help empower teachers to move through this cycle more thoughtfully, more efficiently, more effectively. And we think of 4 places that school leaders can help accelerate this cycle of experiment and experience. So one is, how can you create resources for research and development that'll accelerate new experiments? How can you create more time for teachers? How can you give them more access to expertise, more coaching to be able to adopt and invent new kinds of experiments, new ways of taking these ideas of instructional improvement and bringing them into classrooms? How can you create the conditions for team learning? How can you adopt looking at student work protocols? How can you adopt instructional rounds? How do you get teachers inside one another's classrooms to be able to review what these small teams of folks conducting experiments are doing and be able to learn from those experiences and adjust? As you do get some innovations that seem to be taking hold, as you do get some things that seem to be working and guiding you towards your learning goals for students, how do you make sure there's opportunities for institutional learning? How can you create the conditions for teacher-led professional development? How can you have teaching fairs? How can you take your faculty meetings and have less time for reading announcements and more time for teachers sharing innovative practices with one another? And then the final piece that school leaders can do to help supervise this whole cycle is to think about, how do you create the conditions for a shared vision and a shared instructional language? As teachers in classrooms engage in this cycle of experiment and experience, ideally we don't have experiments that are going in every different direction that prevents teachers from learning from one another. What we want to see happening is that while there's lots of room for autonomy and flexibility and an individual imprint in one classrooms, we also have groups of folks that are working together on a shared problem of practice towards a shared vision of what awesome looks like. We want to be able to create the conditions for this shared vision and this sharing by using and adopting some kind of instructional language, some way of talking about teaching and talking about innovative teaching that makes it easier for teachers across disciplines, across buildings, to be able to talk to one another about what good teaching and learning looks like. So the role of school leaders who aren't in classrooms every day is to try to use these 4 general categories of approaches to grease the wheel of the cycle of experiment and experience that teachers are really driving of the center. So everyone in a school building has a role to play in launching innovation, and hopefully what we'll do as we go forward in this course is give you more specific ideas about how you can tackle each of these different kinds of pieces of this broader cycle of instructional change.